All right, gang. Greetings. This is Dave Littlejohn, continuing with our series, The Stuff About Money They Don't Teach in School. Today we're going to be talking about inflation. I'm going to get rolling over here and let's see what we've got. I'm going to let you know, kids, you may have to help your parents out today. This is a little bit more sophisticated because we're going to build on several of the things that we've talked about in previous lessons. I know that your memory is nice and sharp, and sometimes, your parents, they forget stuff. So you get to help them out on this one. But don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it, and we'll get through it together. All right, look, inflation is one of those things that we sometimes talk about, but it's not often explained. So, step one today is let's talk about what is inflation. This is really wordy, right? It's a quantitative measure. It's looking at a basket of goods or services and looking at how the price changes over time. It's oftentimes measured as a percentage, and it's also sometimes discussed as purchasing power. Okay, so there you go. That totally makes sense. Aren't you glad I explained that to you just like a textbook? Great. Let's say maybe we should take a look and see if we can see inflation a little bit better. Here's the way inflation works. You've got think about over time the price of something and how it changes. So here we have look at a cup of coffee, right? And so back in 1970, before most of you, at least my intended audience, right, if you're junior high, high school age or what have, then you were not around and you have no idea what a cup of coffee costs in 1970. And probably not even in the year 2000. But you could go to, and it's funny because if you go to Starbucks, good luck getting a cup of coffee for $1.59. But our illustration is still accurate, right? Every year over time, things cost a little bit more for the same thing, right? Maybe it's a stamp, maybe it's a gallon of milk, maybe it's a gallon of gasoline, but the price changes over time. And part of what's going on is that the value of our currency is getting weaker, right? So the dollar that you're using to purchase is less strong, so it buys less over time. That's kind of how inflation works in reality, is it's about purchasing power. So we can reflect percentages and so forth, but this is the concept. So why does it happen? And yeah, I'll give you a little hint. It happens for a lot more than one reason. But there are several, so let's kind of look at them. First of all, there's something that we call demand pull. Okay. Now, we could say inflation is not a magic mystery. Let's look at it and think more like, hey, how come some stuff goes up in price and some stuff doesn't? Okay. So if everybody wants something, it costs more. Okay, if you want to go get access to, it used to be when I was a kid, they were Air Jordans. I don't know what the cool shoe is now, but I leave that to my kids, right? I'm not cool, I get it. But if you really wanted those shoes and everybody wants them, then what the people selling the shoe will do is they'll charge more. Because, remember we talked about this before, the supply and demand, right? It's that curve, and so if we change one, it moves the curve one way or the other. And if we have really high demand and the same amount of supply, then the price goes up because more people are willing to pay up to get it. So we can have demand pull. That can increase, and that can be an inflation trigger. We can have cost push. If that same pair of shoes gets more expensive to make because the input costs going into it cost more, then we can have cost push. Or there can be built in. And I meant to start, the demand's the easy one, right? Demand we get. Like, I understand how demand works. I want it, I'll pay more. Okay, great. Cost push, that's the trickier one. But if the shoes, if it costs more to buy, the leather and the rubber and the stitching and the wages that you pay somebody to make the shoe, if all that gets more expensive, then one of two things happens. Either the company makes less money because they don't have the margin. That's the difference between what they buy or what they produce it for and what they sell it for. The difference in price is margin. That's their profit. So if they can't increase the price, but their costs underneath go up, then they make less money. So their margin shrinks, or the price goes up as they have their input costs go up. So that's cost push inflation. And then we have, this is the concept that throws people, but this is the one I want us to talk about because, again, we're putting pieces together. We have built in inflation. Some things go up in price because we tell them to, right? Minimum wage, every few years, they increase the law that says how much you have to pay people. And so businesses are told you will pay more, and that's a form of cost push, right? The part of the cost of doing business was changed. It went up in price, and so what happens is the consumer that gets the end product pays for that. This is a conversation that I would encourage you all to have, and this can be, it's almost a bonus question, but you can have this discussion with your family is, who pays for costs increases, right? Let's say we have an increase in taxes that a company has to pay. So let's raise taxes on companies. Who pays for it? Okay, does the company pay for it? And if we have increases in minimum wage, who pays for it? Is it the company that pays for it, or who? You know, and I'll give you a hint that the price changes on something. So if the price, if the cost change going into it changes the price of something else, right? Yeah, a comment, Carol. Yeah, we're here. I see you. So sorry if the connectivity is iffy. Anyway, that's the built-in inflation component. Let's look at another reason that inflation happens, and this one is it's gonna seem weird, but we ask it to. You think, what? What are you talking about? How do we ask for inflation? Well, we control things in the government. One of the things is what we call fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is things like taxes and the rules. If you change the rules or you change the taxes, you just changed a cost for the business. And that's part of cost push inflation, right? So if you increase taxes, then that will change the way businesses operate. And sometimes businesses move, right? I don't like the taxes in the United States. Let's move our headquarters to another country. Sometimes they change states. Sometimes they ship parts of the business overseas. So if you hear like, oh, this thing was designed in the United States, but it was manufactured in China. Who does that? Apple, most of your phones, right? Most of those devices are manufactured overseas and then they are brought back. And that's because of the business reasons behind how they're trying to maintain their profit margins. And then we have monetary policy. And monetary policy is one that is not well understood. At a basic level, it's easy, but it's got a lot of sophistication to it at the same time. But I mean, the concept's easy enough. It's how much money is available to chase things around. Like how much money is in your pocket that you can spend. That's part of your demand, is how much money do I have? And how easy is it to get access to that money? And we can affect that in some ways by our monetary policy, and that's things like setting interest rates and setting the rules that govern banks. So let's take a look at that. Okay, let's remember how banks make their money. Right? Remember, banks, they do make money, but they do it because they live in opposite land from us. Right? We give money to a bank, and that's a deposit. That's our asset that we put in the bank. To the bank, a deposit is a liability because they pay you interest on it. So they want to loan that money out to somebody else, and then somebody else will have to pay the bank interest, and that makes it an asset for the bank. But when we have a loan, if we borrow money, that's a liability to us, right? We have to pay it back. So again, banks, when they make a loan, that's an asset. When we make a loan, or when we take the loan, it's a liability. So they're opposite land from us. But we did talk about this in another call, and I keep calling them calls, in another session that we did here, another webinar about how banks make their money. And when they make a loan to somebody, and that somebody takes that loan, uses some of it and puts some of it into another bank, then that other bank gets money, and they turn around and re-loan it as well. And it keeps getting re-loaned out. Okay, and so in effect, we created money. If we take $1 and put it in the bank, and that bank loans the same dollar out 10 times, the $1 was magnified to become $10. So now let's talk about how price gets set. This is a really simple review, but it was about supply and demand. Remember, demand is how much you want stuff, and supply is how much of the stuff is available. Well, money is one of those stuff things, right? How much money is available in the market, right? How many dollars exist? If we make more dollars exist, then there's more dollars to chase after goods and services. And so that's one of the things that we do is when we look at monetary supply, we change the number of dollars that exist. So how many dollars can be spent? If we change and make more dollars available, it will change the price of things. This is totally relevant today, right now, because one of the things you may have talked about is if you're staying at home and not going to school, or your parents are not going to work and some businesses are shut down, one of the things that the government is trying to do is what they call stimulus, right? The government is trying to put money in the economy so that it is available to keep the prices from falling. Because if nobody wants to buy stuff, then the prices actually go down, not up. So you can have inflation, prices go up, you have deflation. Now, does deflation happen? Oh, it absolutely does. If you look at the cost of some things, let's look at the cost of big screen TVs. It used to be for you to get a 42-inch flat panel TV, you could spend $10,000. Now you can go to your average box store and buy one for a couple $100. Deflation, because the demand was, even though demand went up, the availability of supply changed radically, right? Tons more supply, way cheaper to manufacture it. So we do see deflation in some areas of the world too. So it's not always inflation. So supply and demand will continue to matter. So let's look at this, putting it all together, right? The banks make more money by loaning out more money. So more, if the government puts stimulus in the economy, then people get money, they put it in the banks loan that money out. If you make the interest rates lower, people can borrow more money because it's cheaper to borrow the money because your loan payments are lower if interest rates are lower. So you can make bigger loans to people. And that's part of what we call the money multiplier effect. So the multiplier is, let's get money into the banking system and let's let the banks magnify it so we can generate inflation. It's actually a target of the Federal Reserve, and our government wants a little bit of inflation. Trick question, how much, I'll just ask it, we're not going to do a bonus for the next one, but how much do you think, how much inflation does the federal government want? And in general, it is 2%, right? That's what they're looking for, is they want about 2% per year. That's what they're looking for. Right now, we're not seeing that. We're actually seeing inflation below 2%. We used to see it back in the 1990s and the 2000s. It was closer to 3%. And then after 2008, we had a financial meltdown, and then we saw inflation decline as well. So we're always, there are reasons that we want to generate inflation. I'm not going to really go into a ton of it today, but you understand that we want it in certain environments because it keeps prices stable and because it helps the government and other entities financially to have things continue to increase in value. Even for retirement, if you think about investing or you think about buying a house, who wants to buy a house and then later on sell it for less than you bought it for? Nobody, right? So they want it to go up in value a little bit. Inflation is one of the ways they try to encourage that to happen. Okay, so we know if there's more money in circulation, chasing the same amount of goods, and the demand is otherwise unchanged, the more money gets spent on the same amount of goods, that's how we trigger inflation. So that's kind of the summary for the day. If you think about it, inflation is all around us. And really what's far more dangerous is deflation. Okay, if you've ever heard about the Great Depression, deflation is scary because you can get into a spiral where prices decline and then people lose their jobs. And then when people lose their jobs, they don't have any money to buy stuff. And so then the prices decline even more, and then more people lose their job, and then more people can't afford to buy stuff. And so then the price has to drop even further, and then more people lose their job. And you can see the idea. It just gets worse and worse. So we want to maintain fairly stable value in our currency. We like to see a slow increase, or at least stable, right? And I'm not going to discuss a whole lot about why we do this. If you really want to have a fun conversation with your parents, ask about how the United States used to have all of the dollars they had, used to have gold backing every dollar. It was called the gold standard. And so for every dollar that existed, you knew that there was gold somewhere in a vault that backed up that dollar. And then we left the gold standard, and now the dollars are they're not linked to gold, so it's based on the faith and credit of the U.S. government. So as long as the government pays its bills, people continue to say, okay, well, the dollars are worth something. If the government stopped paying its bills, so you get the idea. But that's how it works here. And as we talked about, we want to see, because over time we want to see things go up in value. This is a chart of compound interest, but inflation actually has a compounding effect. If we do 2% inflation year over year over year, now we talked yesterday about the rule of 72, right? How long does it take for something to double in price at 2%? Right? At 2%, about every, well, we'll divide 72 by 2, right? So every 36 years, prices will double, which means if a house costs $300,000, let's just say like average house price is about $250,000 in the United States. In 36 years, if inflation is consistent, the average house price should be $500,000, right? And if minimum wage is $15 an hour, we would expect minimum wage to be closer to $30 an hour by the time it's 36 years from now, if things all follow suit. In reality, inflation does have a mind of its own, and it will not be consistent like that. But that is the concept behind it. So there you have it, gang. That is how inflation works in a nutshell. And if you've got other questions, we always encourage you, send us an email. We want to make sure that we get this stuff addressed and give you a chance to learn on this stuff. If you've got suggestions or other things you'd like to see, let us know. And don't forget, we got a bunch of resources. So parents, or in this case, as I said, for all of you younger folks that have parents that you're taking them to school, helping them figure out how to be better stewards of their resources and figuring out how to work the money thing, then go to our website and we got all kinds of fun toys there as well. So a bunch of free calculators and stuff if you want to figure out, hey, how much might my savings grow to, or how much will inflation change my purchasing power? It's all available. So, all right. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, this has been David Littlejohn. We will catch you later.